Support for the Couples Council comes from Mercier Wellness and Consulting. Their purpose is to equip you with the right skills for a happy and healthy relationship. Schedule your consultations now. For more information, visit mercierwellness.com. Mercier Wellness and Consulting. Small steps, big changes.
This podcast is not a substitute for therapy. Please consult a licensed professional for your mental health needs. Now on with the show.
Hello and welcome to the Couples Council. I'm your host, Dr. Jameson Mercier, licensed clinical social worker and Doctor of Marriage and Family Therapy. Hello again and welcome to yet another episode. Thank you to you all who've been, buckled in for the long run, and welcome to those of you who are brand new to the podcast. If this is the first show that you're hearing, you're not missing anything, but you definitely want to go back and see where we've been, what we've done. Back to season 1, actually. All right, find out who this guy is that's on the mic. Why is there a picture of his wife on here? Where is she? Yeah, all those things. Welcome. Today's episode is I say it every week, and I'm not ashamed to say it because that's what we try to do. We try to bring you value and quality guests and information. And today is no exception. Okay, so our guest today is someone whom I connected with again on social media, and she and I had a very interesting conversation. She works with military couples, military families, and over the last few years I've developed an interest in military families, specifically servicemen and women, and just the whole dynamic of being a military spouse. And so I'm talking about none other than Dr. Sarah Williams, licensed psychotherapist and walking billboard for career women and boss moms. All right, she's known as the executive therapist. She is devoted to ending the mental health stigma. Through her practice as a licensed and board certified therapist and the creator of her own TV show, Dr. Sarah After Dark. All right, she's reaching millions of households, and she also consults for major TV networks. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to Dr. Sarah Williams. Dr. Williams, hello and welcome to the Couples Council podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, no, thank you for saying yes. We were just chatting briefly before recording. This season, we're targeting and focusing on not only relationships, but relationships in the context of our mental health. And when I came across your profile, the thing that jumped out at me was your area of specialty, which is grief and loss, as well as trauma. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your work, and how you got into that line of work?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm licensed and board certified in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I own Covenant Way Clinical Counseling. In our practice, we specialize in treating families and individuals, women, and people of color, and help them in their journey as they go through life. I have a specialization in grief, stress, and trauma. I am also the TV host and creator, as well as executive producer of the Dr. Sarah After Dark television show, which is a mental health awareness show. Mm-hmm. I believe that my vision became a fruition when I overcame struggles of my own and how difficult it was for me to find the help and support I needed. I'm actually a professor turned therapist. I had
Uh,
already earned a PhD in education, and I went through significant loss, back-to-back losses and trauma, and I had a very difficult time finding a therapist that looked like me that could help me. So I credentialed and I passed the exams, the licensure exam and the board exam to practice in Virginia. And I was able to move forward and open my own practice. And then from there, the Dr. Sarah After Dark show was birthed.
wow. Okay. Just curious, that whole process, how long was that for you from the time you were looking?
Wow.
Yeah.
My experiences with trauma actually began in my childhood, and I could not find anyone that could relate to me. Uh, Even as a young adult and in going to college, I couldn't relate. However, it became more apparent to me in my adulthood. In 2012, my mother passed away from cancer, and I was grief-stricken, and I was just hurting tremendously. I knew that I needed help, but I really didn't know how to access the help or who I could go to that could relate to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was stunned at the number of therapists that I saw that actually ostracized the fact that I had such minimal coping because I already had a PhD, as if somehow having a doctorate degree would insulate me from the human experience of grieving.
Wow.
That was a life-changing experience for me. And as I began on my journey to healing, I started becoming more at peace with my mother's loss and the loss of my mother. And then my husband was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh,
And that
wow.
was only less than a year and a half later. And within 6 months of his diagnosis, he passed away. Again, I was just taken down into the abyss of how do I pull from this? Because my mother, I reconciled that she was older. She had already seen my children be born. They were about 8 or 9 years old when she passed away. And I kind of developed some understanding and solace to her that loss.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that I was in my 40s and I'm now a widow. I could not accept that that was going to be the end of a relationship of my children's father through death.
Wow.
So I found myself seeking support again, and it was hard. It was hard finding what I felt was someone that could relate to me on an intellectual level. Like I'm considered to be a higher functioning client.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
with that regard, that is why my additional specialty is working with executives, celebrities, professional athletes. So I see folks that are just like me. They have PhDs, they're maybe leading a church, they're pastors, and they have the same challenges as everybody else with the additional burden of also being a mentor and a leader. So I'm really kind of found my calling through my own pain and loss.
Wow. Wow. That's a complaint of many clinicians and therapists in general, but also, some of the more skilled ones, because there is whether you call it the realization or the thought or the experience, that it's hard to find someone who will or can relate to you on that level, or who will even take you on once they see that perhaps you may be a bit more qualified.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's hard. hmm I had one therapist actually say to me, "Well, didn't they teach you in school how to deal with this?"
Right.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah, yeah. We don't all get it right. Sometimes we miss some things as clinicians, unfortunately.
hmm
Wow. When specifically with your husband passing away, how long had you guys been married at that time?
At that time, we had been married 15 years.
Okay, so this was a major loss.
Yes,
Okay. And he'd been with you through your mother's passing as well.
yes. He was just as grief-stricken as I was. They were very close.
Wow. Okay. Again, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your loss. Now, being able to turn that and that experience from your grief and other grief. So you work with executives. Do you work with couples? I know you said families.
hmm
Tell me about your work with couples around the loss and the grief.
I have couples that seek out my services. Many of them are military couples. Because of my connection with the military, I was relocated to Virginia as a military spouse. So I have a connection to the military community,
Mm,
and oftentimes couples that are uh, military families, they have an additional challenge of deployments and stressors that go along with being a service member and what happens with the family.
mm-hmm.
So I do see quite a few couples married that face all of the typical challenges, infidelity, communication barriers, dysfunctional patterns that they brought into the marriage. Just a multitude of variables. A lot of times, as we know, the difficulties and the arguments over finances and other mundane issues are the underpinnings. It's just something much greater. There's a
Mm-hmm.
great explanation to why there's a disagreement. So
Yeah.
I do work with quite a few married couples in my practice.
Okay. You know, the military family is something I myself have taken an interest in over the last few years. And that's just stemming from working with servicemen and women. Um, and as you said a moment ago, the things that they shoulder um, is for many couples, while they seem like regular couples and family stuff separate from the deployments, we cannot imagine what these families go through. If you wouldn't mind speaking just a little bit more about the struggles of the couples or the marriages in these military marriages.
hmm What I've noticed that's a unique characteristic is oftentimes people that are in the civilian world, they look at the military as a unit. They think military families have all the support. They see, for instance, changes geographically, and they think, well, you just go somewhere else and you connect with other people in that area that are also in the military, and you all hang out on weekends and barbecue together, and whatever trouble you have, the military's got you covered.
Mm,
And nothing could actually be further from the truth. There's a deficit in the support structure for families, particularly if the service member has to deploy. So
okay.
say, for instance, you have a married couple. They relocate to the area. The wife is with the children. She's home. She's managing the household. He is fulfilling his responsibility to the United States military, and he may have to be deployed. Isolation, loneliness, overwhelm, the triggers from being in a system of not really recognizing that there are variables that are stacked up against you. So you function as a single parent when in fact you are not.
Wow.
And there's no support within the network to address that. The children also endure the stress of that because they see the remaining parent going through more stressors and they have classmates that maybe can't relate to that, or even teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So they bring that back to the household. So now you have behavioral issues. So now the remaining spouse is alone, is trying to manage the household, and now has child or children that now have behavior issues. So now you have a marital issue.
Right, because that will affect the marriage.
That's correct.
And so in the in the deployments, I would imagine at times there's a lot of grief in that and the loss, even though it isn't the loss in the traditional sense. He or she will be coming back, but there is a sense of grief and loss there, I would imagine.
Yes. It is a unique characteristic, and it's hard to identify without really being close to the issue, because the same individual that had to relocate with a service member that's facing isolation also experiences the grief and loss of identity, of career, of a support structure, of having a meaning or importance in the world. So this person is sacrificing all of their hopes and dreams to support the service member, because it's very hard to maintain a career of your own if you're moving every few years, or if you're tasked with being a solo parent in a marital relationship.
Wow. You know, when you mention the loss of career and perhaps even, identity or importance, I'm glad you mentioned those specifically, because when we often think of grief and loss, and even trauma for that matter, we don't associate grief and loss with those things. For most people, grief and loss is attached to the loss of a loved one or an individual, and not so much, loss of a home or a geographic location or a career.
Right. It's hard to fulfill any of your own dreams, difficult to maintain an educational pursuit. Sometimes the finances, unfortunately, are a barrier. There's just not enough money for that spouse to pursue those dreams. So they kind of have to be stagnant and in place, but in a place where they have no support, there's no structure there to give the individual a social support. And we haven't even pictured the possibility that when each of us enter a marriage, we bring our own set of brokenness to the marriage. So say, for instance, this individual was already struggling with anxiety or depression or some mental health issue in addition to that, and you have to relocate. So whatever you had going on is now magnified, and it's magnified in a new place where nobody knows or understands you. That's what I'm seeing in my practice.
And so when encountering these individuals, these couples, these families, where do you begin? What is the initial approach to treating this individual or these families? What's that like for you in your practice?
The initial part of how we begin is we start with an assessment that's very thorough. Sometimes my assessment may take 2 or 3 sessions just to get a full picture of what I'm working with, all the challenges. If both parties can be in the office at the same time, that is ideal. But sometimes I have to work with what I've got. Like, for instance, a spouse may be here and another is on a ship, and I have to work with what I've got. And we kind of chip away at the core issue. Because initially the couple may present, well, we disagree on parenting and finances and time with friends. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But really the bigger issue was something else. The bigger issue could have been something else. The bigger issue could have been an affair.
Yeah.
Or the bigger issue could be there's some level of abuse in the relationship. And it takes a skill set, and it takes just a slow inspection of the couple, and the couple as a unit and as an individual too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that takes time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you say that too, because, again, as a unit, yes, it's assumed we come together, but even though we often lose sight of the individual in a marriage, it never really goes away, and it's important to hold on to that, whether military family or civilian life.
Right. And even when a couple is impacted by the military, it's ironic that the majority of them would not choose differently. They would not choose not to be in the military.
Really?
The wife is supportive of the husband, or the husband is supportive of the wife's active duty status, even though it's stressful, even though it's just overwhelming. They would not choose differently.
Wow.
I was a military spouse. I had a significant amount of stress placed on me. I had a blended family situation that was very stressful, but I would not choose differently.
And so No, go ahead. Continue. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think that we hold a higher goal in mind, which is a commitment to the United States of America.
Okay. And so that, I was going to ask, seems to be what sustains or provides some, I don't know, some solace or some way to cope or some reminder of the much bigger
Yes.
goal. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's a beautiful example of patriotism, the self-sacrificing. However, I would love to see change. I would love to see that if individuals make that decision to enlist in the military to support our country, that our country would in turn make sure that the couples and the children particularly have what they need.
I've had limited experience with servicemen and women and their families. Actually, nothing like the amount of experience you've had. And I say that to say, is there a difference when someone, for families or couples who enlist versus, say, the officers?
I think the difference with your officers is probably because maybe there's additional education, that the individuals maybe have more education. They have maybe some better coping because they know how to access the resources better.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I have now, it's not a couple, it's actually an individual. And it's interesting to watch the process unfold, even as an individual, that within a marriage, perhaps if you're an officer, you may have gone through college and you've had a psychology course, at least one or two along the way, versus, say, if you had not been to college at all and you just went through the military, then they do their own training in different programs, but the sensitivity level and the understanding of say how to know when I need what I need. How
Mm-hmm.
do I know I've gotten to the point that I need to call out for help?
Right. And
And
go ahead.
generally, your higher functioning client with the education, the leadership role, the author status is probably going to know or have a clue as to how to access that.
Right. The access piece too. Right. 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 Um, wow, that's interesting because, mental health in the military, that's an issue that's everywhere, and has been for quite some time. But when you niche it down to specifically within the family or the couples and the needs there, my assumption has always been that, of course, the resources are there and the families and the spouse is um, provided for,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally speaking. Um, but I suppose, being provided for and then, as you just said, accessing it are two different things.
And who is providing the support? Are they licensed folks like you and I? Or are they individuals that maybe they have that position and they've been placed there and they may not have the training to really look at problems clinically?
Mm.
That's a question that I'm not sure we can answer with a favorable response.
Yeah, because again, mental health wise, there is such a lack of providers, and there's such a need. So I'm inclined to agree with you in that regard. You mentioned a moment ago in terms of specializing in working with people of color. If you can talk a little bit more about that, or just finding the struggles you had in providers who looked like you and resembled you and your experiences, um, that was your experience. But since being in or having been the military spouse and now provider, have you seen any change in that aspect?
A change in,
Perhaps more providers more diversity in providers, more.
yes, I've seen a upsurge of providers of color that have are going through the process. They are getting licensed and credentialed and becoming private practice owners at
Mm,
an astounding rate. And I think it's beautiful. I think there cannot be enough of folks that can offer services to families that they don't have to experience the barrier of ethnicity or culture or race or even socioeconomic status. I I did not grow up in a housing project. I was born in a housing project, but we moved out of it when I was a baby. But I
mm,
was born in a housing project. Now, my ability to relate is still there because I have siblings that were 9 and 10 years old when we moved out of it.
okay.
And that in itself, I have the ability to have, say, for instance, a client that has millionaire status at 10 o'clock. And then I'll have a Medicaid client at 11.
Hmm.
And I can relate to both.
That's awesome.
And that's what we need. That's what we need. I am the practice that I am not exclusive for the well-resourced only, that we also accept individuals with limited resources because the need is there. Mental health is mental health. Grief, stress, and trauma is what it is. The gravity of the experience and the longevity of it depends on, yes, your resources and your ability to access help. If the access is not there, then the grief, stress, and trauma drags on, and it turns out into addiction, violence, death,
Mm-hmm.
etc.,
Yeah.
incarceration. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm glad to hear you say, people often complain about the cost, as a barrier to access. But I often say there's a therapist at every budget. There's, like you said, it's there. And I've also had the good fortune of being able to service clients on all socioeconomic levels.
Hmm.
And I don't know what's your experience of that or what you feel about it, but I feel um, uniquely positioned in that regard, to be able to bounce between the different groups.
Yes. It's amazing that my comfort level can be such a chameleon. It's amazing to me, but at the same time, I see similarities because I'm looking at and I'm identifying the problem and looking for ways to assist with the solution and not without regard to, well, this person is a medical doctor and owns a private practice and et cetera. And
Mm-hmm.
this person this morning was getting food stamps. It just
Right.
that doesn't have that much of a weight on how my perception is, and the treatment of the problem is what it is. Now, yes, I probably have to do more case management with a client that has limited resources.
Right. That part. Yes. Yes.
Right.
And oftentimes those clients tend to be more of a crisis thing and need more motivation and pushing versus, not always, but versus some of your other better functioning clients.
I think that from my perspective, clients that have limited resources have been hurt more by the system and individuals that were put in place that were supposed to help them. And they're having a harder time and they give up quicker because they've been hurt so much and disappointed so much.
Mm. I have to agree with you because I do some work with a local school district, and you hear that from parents a lot. In many instances, they're not contacted until the kid is about to be sent home on a suspension. And the question is, well, why not contact the parent, 2 months ago? And so they do become disillusioned by the system, be it an educational system or the, you know, whatever system they may be engaged in.
They find themselves in counseling offices, say, that will accept Medicaid, that maybe the quality is not there.
Mm-hmm.
The clinician is disinterested because maybe he or she is thinking about, I'm not getting paid that much to see this person.
Yeah.
Or they go into it already making assumptions that they're not going to commit to the treatment anyway. So,
What's the point?
right, what's the point?
Mm-hmm. Which is unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. It does happen. Um, I want to pivot a little bit and ask you about Dr. Sarah After Dark. If you could, tell us about the show and what that's about.
Sure. Dr. Sarah After Dark, as I mentioned earlier, is a mental health awareness show. It is designed to bring light to the darkness as a way to end the mental health stigma. Individuals, they come on my show and they share their stories of pain, loss, experience with mental illness, abuse, addiction, and somehow they found their way through it. And what Dr. Sarah After Dark does is it allows the audience to see that process in terms of what the person experienced and where they are now. Because a lot of times we don't get a chance to see say, individuals that we look up to. We
Mm.
don't get to see that dark part of their life. We only see the bright part.
Yeah, the
So we
highlights.
don't know. Yeah, we see the highlights. We don't see behind closed doors this person experienced this, or went through this, or still struggles with depression, or was bullied and it feels insecure because of the bullying, had a family that was involved in domestic violence. And it's just a multitude of guests that bring their stories to me. A lot of times these are known individuals and politicians and, like I said, political leaders, celebrities,
Mm-hmm.
different folks, business leaders, community activists. They all come to Dr. Sarah After Dark show to highlight their experience. I'm selective about my guests because I want to make sure that I retain that fidelity and that promise to making sure that it's about increasing awareness and ending this stigma that we have that's killing our communities. If we don't start addressing mental health just like any other disease or disability, we will all perish. It has to be addressed, and I'm very passionate about it.
Well, it sounds like you're doing great work, and I have to agree, it's something that is much needed, um, because we do only see the highlights, and today's society and social media ensures that, we only get the highlights, and that for some then further increases their struggles with mental health, because there's that, comparison that happens and just drives them deeper and deeper into whatever issues that they've had, and brings on all kinds of, shame and guilt. And even in the context of a marriage or relationship, you can find couples who will begin to compare their partner or spouse or their entire marriage to someone else's marriage, which is
Mm-hmm.
just a
Mm-hmm.
recipe for disaster.
For instance, with social media, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We will look at social media and compare our entire life existence to what we see. And we know that that's just a snapshot of that person at that moment, at that second, with perfect lighting and perfect hair and perfect
Mm-hmm.
everything on that day. We don't know what the person was dealing with. We've had very few perspectives on people outside of that perfection. And actually, Dr. Sarah After Dark is kind of turning that mirror around and saying, let's idolize those that are transparent,
Mm.
because the transparency is where our healing is located.
Wow. Wow. Mm. Yeah, I have to agree with you. I have to agree with you. And then, with telling of the stories, being transparent and vocalizing it, not only does wonders for others, but for the individual in the telling of the story as well.
Yes.
Wow. Um, wow, that's great. And if we were interested in finding Dr. Sarah After Dark, as well as your practice, Covenant Way Clinical Counseling, tell us where you are, on the web,
Okay.
where we might be able to find you.
Okay. Well, of course, like everybody else, Instagram is Dr. Sarah, and that's Sarah with an H, DrSarah.w.
Mm.
Facebook, I think, is at I am Dr. Sarah Williams, and hashtag Dr. Sarah After Dark, and that's DrSarah After Dark. If you are interested in seeing the show, it comes on the Now Network on Mondays at 5 p.m. It's now streaming online, even to Roku TV. And that's Mondays at 5 p.m. And that's the nownetwork.org, I think. Anyone that's interested in being a guest on my show, And Dr. Sarah loves sponsors and advertisers that are in the mental health field.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, the show is reaching 39 million viewers. And if you have an interest of maybe submitting an application to be on the show or to advertise or serve as a sponsor, then you can send me an email to iamdrsarah@gmail. I am Dr. Sarah TV @gmail.com.
Okay. And all those things will be in our show notes, and the links will be posted so that people can always go back to that in case they didn't catch that. Dr. Sarah, it has been a treat. It really has been.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be a part of your podcast. I do hope that my visit today was enlightening and perhaps bringing somebody else out of the darkness.
Well, listen, considering that that's what you do, I'm sure you've shed a lot of light, at least for me. So thank you. Thank you for saying yes.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, another one is in the books. Be sure to go check her out on her social media. Check out the show. I'm sure you will love it. Reach out to Dr. Sarah. Let her know where you heard her, where you found out about her. And then come back and let me know what you thought of this show. Be sure to leave it in the comment section. Reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, the website, the email. You know how to get in touch with me. And as we always say, sharing is caring, guys. Let someone who you know would benefit from this episode, let them know. Send them a text, a DM with this in their text messages, in their inboxes. We're continuing to grow. We're continuing to spread. I think we've been heard in every state except for maybe 3. I won't say who they are, but thank you for spreading the word. We appreciate it. Thank you guys again from the bottom of my heart. I will look forward to catching you here for yet another episode of the Couples Council. Bye now.
Hey everybody! Thank you for listening to our mom and dad.
If you like them as much as we do, then click subscribe and leave a comment. But now they have to go because it's family time.
So go practice what you heard, and we'll catch you on the next episode.